Hello my fellow duplicants, it's Real-Time Ben here with a new guide on the thrilling yet awfully troubling subject of pipes. This guide is going to be geared towards those of you that are new to the game while providing a refresher to the more experienced duplicants who've been around for a few cycles. So sit back, grab yourself a slice of pepper bread, because it's time to get pumped up on pipes. Before we get started, if you end up finding this video helpful and would like me to make more tutorial content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me know what you are looking for and will help shape future content going forward. It is important to understand how fluid flows as you begin to improve and make more complicated designs. A pipe with no input or output will result in the contents of the pipe to stand still and not move. When a pipe only has an input node on it and there are gaps in the pipe, the contents of the pipe will backflow towards that input location, filling those available gaps. Between an input and an output node, fluid will always flow towards the output node location regardless of the type. This means that it will flow towards bridges, valves, machinery, even if the machine is disabled with automation. Multiple pipes can be connected directly together, and at each junction, the game will determine automatically where to consume or send the contents. Pipe junctions end up being particularly important if you are trying to balance input sources or output consumers. In this example, you will see 3 pumps connected to a single junction, resulting in the fluid sent to the pipe with the output port being consumed evenly from each pump. Here are 3 additional examples of pipe junctions. In this first example, we see a single input node sending fluid down a pipe to 2 output nodes. The fluid is flowing through a pipe junction, and the game is dividing the pipe contents evenly between those 2 output nodes. The second example is similar, but instead of using a direct pipe junction, we're using a bridge instead, and the fluid is being distributed evenly between the 2 output nodes. We'll talk more about bridges and looping later in the video, but I want to make a note about the behavior of this with a bridge because it's usually the reason why people struggle with looping pipe contents. In the third example, we have a single input node feeding a pipe that is being distributed across 3 output nodes. There are multiple junctions in this pipeline though, and you'll notice that at the first junction here, pipe is being divided evenly between the first junction or the first output node and everything else down the line. And then again, it is divided evenly between these 2 nodes as well. This means that this first pipe output is going to receive twice as much fluid as these other 2. The first time a player uses a bridge, it is typically to cross over another pipe. You will have to do a lot of bridging depending on the complexity of your pipe network, so having a solid understanding of them is important. If we go back to how fluids flow between an input and an output port, bridges are a particularly useful tool for controlling the flow of fluids in your pipes anywhere within your pipe network. Similar to junctions, pipe contents will be consumed evenly when entering an input port from multiple connections and distributed evenly when exiting an output port. Unlike junctions, however, you can have 3 or 4 inputs in addition to 3 or 4 outputs, like so. This can come in really handy depending on what you're doing. An example of how I might use something like this is if I wanted to fill 4 atmospheres evenly at a time, and then the next 4 evenly at a time, and so on. At some point in time, you'll run into a situation where you have pipes that are backing up and you're going to want to do something with the excess liquid or gas that is in the line. Let's look at a couple of ways to solve this problem. Here's a pump filling up a reservoir, but we have closed the liquid vent so no fluid can exit. I never want to stop the fluid flowing in this pipe, so one way that we can prevent this from happening is to make an overflow. When additional pipes are connected to an output node that has become blocked, the contents of the pipe will continue to flow past the blocked node onto the next output node in the pipeline. A great example of where you might see somebody using something like this would be as if you had multiple tanks hooked up together and you're just wanting it whenever this tank gets full to go to the next one, and so on and so forth. There are going to be situations where multiple output nodes on the same pipe will not be practical for what you're wanting to do. Another way of making an overflow is to use a bridge. Since the white output node on the bridge takes priority on the line, fluid will continue to be fed through the bridge unless that pipe backs up. If that happens, fluid will then overflow to the next available output node on the line connected to the white output port on the bridge. Here's an example that I don't think it's actually going to work, but you would see that if this polluted water backs up, there we go. If this pipe ever backs up, this extra polluted water actually is flowing back out to go wherever it's going to go. Otherwise, it'll go through the water sieve normally and be used as part of our toilet system. There are going to be times where you're going to want to prioritize one lane over another. And, you know, in the examples that we've shown so far, there's really no way to do that. We've talked about overflows. We've talked about merging two things together into a single pipe. And if we wanted to prioritize, say we wanted to prioritize this bottom pipe, whatever this fluid source is, over the top fluid source, how we could do that is actually we can do it with the bridge, and instead of hooking up to the input, we would connect it to the output. And what that'll do is that anything that's hooked up to the green port and coming through here, this will always have priority over anything else. And if this, for whatever reason, stops and empties out, then the main line or the first pipe will start filling up again. The next thing we're going to be talking about is loops. Loops can be quite useful for a variety of different circumstances. Most people end up using them in some sort of like cooling situation where they need to do a cooling loop or a heating loop, something like that. So let's talk about how they work. Well, as we kind of talked about on flow dynamics, right? A fluid is going to flow, fluid and gas is going to flow through a pipe, and it needs an input and an output port, right? So just having this pipe sitting out here isn't going to do anything. And if I wrap this around, what's going to happen? Well, the fluid's going to flow, but then you'll notice as soon as it gets to the junction, it doesn't really know what to do. So how do we fix this? And what do we do? One way we can do that is with a bridge. So I'm just going to throw it right here for the time being. And now you can see that fluid is coming in and it is starting to loop around. Now you're going to see that once this fluid gets back to this junction, we have a problem, right? So now it's it's a junction and it's flowing evenly, and that's like a super bummer. So how can we get around that? Having a loop is really just as simple as using a bridge to have an input and an output and have those two things connected together. So, and that's great. Most loops fail due to improper bridge placement. So let's take a look at like how we fill this thing up. That's the first thing, right? So here's an empty loop. And that's great. And we have fluid and we want to put it in this loop and we want to keep it going. The best thing I can tell you is kind of like the rules of priority on bridges, right? I can take a bridge, and if I put it here, what's going to end up happening is that it will allow this fluid to come into this loop. It's going to come around. It's going to go into this input port, out of this output. And due to the rules of bridge priority and things like that, the loop itself, because of where I put this green input port, is going to have priority in this line. A very common mistake that people do is they'll just say like, oh, hey, I've got this loop, whatever it is, and I'm just going to hook it in to something like this. What will end up happening is you'll overfill the loop, and the loop doesn't know where to go at that point in time. So that's kind of a bummer, right? Like now it'll never flow. It'll actually never flow. Similarly, as if somebody came along and they came in and hooked it up like this as well. Like now you have two input sources. It's going to overfill the loop, and it's probably has something to do with like something in the bridge itself. But anyways, that's what's going on there. So if you're overfilling it, don't hook your line directly up to it. Use a bridge, hook the bridge up, and it'll work. And actually, in order for me to fix this, I kind of need to delete a tile, but use a bridge and use bridge priority, and then that way you will never overfill your loops when you're going through this process. Let's take a look at an example of, I don't know, like setting up a steam turbine cooling loop, you know. This isn't like something I would normally build. I just kind of like wing this for the tutorial, but in general, a steam turbine kind of is going to, over time, is going to need some sort of cooling system for it, right? So one way that you can do that is that you basically set up a loop behind that's going to run down, and I put an aqua tuner that's going to cool our cooling liquid. That's going to help cool our steam turbine. And it's looping down in here. And the aqua tuner itself generates a lot of heat, right? So we're just going to put this inside of the steam chamber, and steam turbine will kind of like fix that or whatever. Maybe this turbine's doing some other work. It's cooling, I don't know, geothermal system, or maybe it's cooling a cooling loop for the base, or maybe you're, who knows what you're using it for. So a volcano, something like that. Anyways, so the, but you can stick this aqua tuner in here. Now, you'll notice this it's not running right now, and why is that? But the loop is still functioning, right? So we're actually looping this crude oil all the way up. It's coming around, and if you look really closely here, what's happening is that we're checking the temperature, and it's going to flow into this input port on the aqua tuner. Now, it's a piece of machinery, right? Like the machinery is, but if it's disabled, it's going to, because we have an overflow on the aqua tuner, the loop is going to come down, overflow off. It's going to go into this bridge just to like get us over here. And this is, and I'll explain why that's there. It's going to exit this bridge, and it's going to flow through this other bridge, which is coming from the output of the aqua tuner, and it's going to keep looping around the way. Now, why is this bridge here? This bridge is actually so that we don't backflow into the aqua tuner. So if the medium that is looping does not need to be cooled, or sorry, it does need to be cooled, once it exits, if this bridge wasn't here and it was just a pipe, what would end up happening is that the crude oil would get split. Some of it would go up, some would go back down, and it would loop back through the aqua tuner, which is kind of inefficient, right? And doing, it's like double cooling that packet. If I actually like turn this thing on, now you'll kind of see like what's going on, which is it's detecting what temperature it needs to be, and it's running that packet through the machine here, and some packets are going up and so on and so forth. This actually is kind of why I don't like this design, because I tend to find that the aqua tuner has a little wind, like it takes a little time to spin up and spin down type of thing. So because of that, maybe a packet sneaks by, but oh well, it's fine. You know, it's more of me disliking the animation than anything else. Let's look at another example of where we have a loop, but we want to do something with the contents of the loop. Oftentimes you're going to run into a situation where maybe you have a cooling loop, maybe you have something else, and you're going to want to take stuff out of the loop to do something with that fluid or gas, and then put it back into the loop. How would we go about doing that? Now, you can't really do that with priority, right? We're going to need some sort of machinery to be able to do that, and that's where things like the liquid shutoff come into play. You can use a liquid shutoff on a loop, and that liquid shutoff can be hooked up to maybe like a thermo sensor or an element sensor, whatever it is, and it can do some stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up, and I'll be right back. Okay, for the purposes of this example, I've gone ahead and set up a loop, and it's rotating in a clockwise direction. We're using a thermo sensor on the pipe to detect what the temperature of the fluid is. If it is not the right temperature, we're going to go ahead and activate this liquid shutoff valve, which is then going to send it down into this tank down below, and that's great. If it's something that we want to keep, we'll allow that fluid to keep flowing freely inside the loop, doing whatever it was intended to do. So that's great, we can get fluid out. Now, how do we get that fluid back in? Well, we learned a little bit earlier about bridge priority, and this is usually where people struggle with this. It might be really easy to think that like, hey, I can just go ahead. I see that this, I actually visually see that this fluid is flowing in a clockwise direction. How do I get it back in? Well, I can just put a bridge up here, right? And drop it in here. Well, I'm gonna wait for this just to loop around a little bit. But what you're gonna see is if I drop this bridge here, this loop is going to stop. And why is that? Well, that's because of like, well, how a bridge works. This bridge is saying that any fluid coming out or coming into this bridge right now needs to be distributed to the right because there is an input port here and it is requesting it. And there's one over here as well. So fluid is going to go to the right and to the left, which means that this pipe has gone from being a single direction pipe to a bidirectional pipe in this one section, effectively breaking the loop. So how do we fix this, right? Like we have our loop, it's doing what we need to do. And a lot of it is just all about bridge placement. So if we think about this for a second, I'm going to go ahead and just make a quick adjustment here. I'll move this bridge over a little bit. Okay, our loop is functioning again. If we make sure that there is only one input port on this line, then the fluid is going to flow that direction. So now, here we go, we have a bridge. This fluid is going to wait here until there's a gap. Here comes a gap right now. And now this stuff's going to fill that line. Due to bridge priority, the loop always has priority. The loop will always keep flowing. And that's how you get fluid back in. And then you can kind of see if I activate this real quick, we're going to take fluid out, and now fluid's being inserted back in. And the only real gap that's in the loop right now is actually right here in this little section. But this is kind of a a manual example, so it's not exactly what we may or may not be looking for, but this gives you an idea of like how this works. And really, bridge placement is about 98% of the problems for like how to control fluid in a pipe. And if this ever stops, it's probably because you have a green output port on a bridge or something like that that is trying to distribute fluid to two different input ports that are either on a bridge or a shutoff or some piece of machinery. Another thing I just wanted to bring up, and just discussing like tanks and things like that, is that tanks are really useful if you're wanting to blend temperatures. So I've set up an example here where I have water on the top here coming in at 28 degrees, and I have water down here on the bottom, which is 88 degrees and cooling because everything around it's a lot colder. What you'll notice is like it's alternating packets coming in here, and in the tank itself, it's actually blending these temperatures. So what will come out is actually 50-degree water. If you need to normalize temperatures, a tank is a great way to do it. Just so if you have multiple input sources that are multiple temperatures, you can blend it in the tank. This comes in particularly useful if you're doing something like radiant cooling in like a sleetweed farm or something like that, and you need a very even temperature like at all times. You can definitely do that and just have like a surplus of like super cold stuff. If something's like 1 degree higher, it can come in, rebalance out with the rest of the tank. If it actually does go below your threshold, you can send it out to cooling, whatever the circumstances are, and so on and so forth. But tanks are really great if you're wanting to balance temperatures and normalize things between multiple sources. The next thing that we need to talk about real quick is just state changes. And what a state change is basically when a fluid or a gas reaches a certain temperature that would require it to either convert into a gas or a liquid or a solid. And any of those things will cause the pipe to break. So, and that also includes things like a liquid changing into another liquid. So like the example that I have set up here is actually I have some crude oil over here that maybe I should have warmed up a little bit toastier, but it, and we're gonna see if this works actually. It will flow through this superheated petroleum area. And in theory, this crude oil should get warm enough that it converts into petroleum in the pipe. But when that happens, the pipe is going to break. So if I look at this, yeah, you can see that right there. So this crude oil is heating up. It's getting a little too cold or too hot. A little bit turned into crude oil, and then it's making it through. But this pipe is breaking, so there is some state change going on here. If I warm this up a little bit, here, let me do this. Crude oil liquid, and let's get this up to like, what is it, 399? Get it really close to where it needs to be here. Here. You're gonna see now this crude oil is gonna break this pipe because it's state changing right here in the pipe. So pay attention to that. You're gonna need to kind of keep an eye on what temperature your fluids are. I'm gonna set up another example that's actually pretty common that people miss quite a bit whenever they're working with a cool slush geyser. Right back. Another little gotcha that I just want to point out for any of you working with a cool slush geyser is maybe you need to convert that polluted water into water for one reason or another. Cool slush water, polluted water coming out of a cool slush geyser is going to come out around -10 degrees Celsius, and that's great for polluted water, but for water it's not great, right? It's going to freeze. And so if you're not paying attention and you're running this fluid through a water sleeve, what will end up happening is it'll process and it'll start breaking the pipe on the outside of the water sieve. So if you're going to be working with a cool slush geyser and you need to, in the off chance that you need to convert it into water, make sure that you either warm this up or do something else so that this is closer to 0 degrees Celsius. That way, you know, you're not having to repair this pipe all the time. The next state change scenario that we're going to be talking about is when working with a vacuum in space. If the surrounding environment of a pipe is in a vacuum, the pipe and its contents will not interact with the vacuum, and this is really great. This allows us to run fluids or gases through a pipe in a vacuum and well, we won't be influenced by the surrounding environment. However, do not forget that the pipe itself has a temperature, and that temperature is determined by the temperature of the material that was used to create the pipe. When transpiring contents through a pipe in a vacuum, the temperature of the contents and the temperature of the pipe are going to interact and eventually normalize. So in this, you can see here, I'm pumping negative 253.7 degrees liquid hydrogen. And if I click on this pipe over here, you can see it's 20 degrees in this current time. And when this hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, hits this, what you'll see is that the pipe is going to cool down to match the temperature of the contents of the pipe. Since this is radiant pipe and this transformation happens very quickly, the pipe doesn't completely break, and now the pipe is cool. No more state changes will occur, and liquid hydrogen can be transported across through this area. To contrast this, let's take a look at what happens when we use an insulated pipe. So here's a case where we're pumping the same temperature, negative 253.7 degrees Celsius, and we have a 18 degree pipe. What you're going to see is that the temperature of the pipe is not changing, and that's, well, as rapidly because it's an insulated pipe. It has a lot more mass, and depending on the type of material we use igneous rock, which cools and heats very slowly. But this pipe is slowly cooling, and that's going to be a problem, right? In this, very simple scenario, you can see that this liquid hydrogen is in this pipe at negative 253.7 degrees Celsius, but by the time it makes it almost over to its destination, it's dropped nearly a full half a degree Celsius. And for things like liquid hydrogen, that can be a problem because we have such a narrow window before a state change occurs. A lot of people, like when they're just mainlining things to a destination, maybe this is going directly into a rocket engine or something like that, this isn't a problem. But if we were to loop liquid hydrogen, which I'll set up an example of that here in a moment, what you'll see is eventually the pipe is going to break because the temperature of the hydrogen is going to warm up to the temperature of the pipe, and eventually the pipe's going to break as a result due to a state change where the liquid hydrogen becomes a gas again. So here's an example of where using insulated pipe in space might be an issue. As you can see, we have a pipe with some bridging going on and a valve, right? And we can just pretend that this might be a rocket engine or something like that. At some point in time, this is going to either back up, or we're just not going to allow fluid to flow in there anymore. And then we're going to try to loop that in the pipe. And that might be great. However, what you're going to see, is that now we have hydrogen sitting in a pipe, and this pipe temperature actually is still 19 degrees. So what's going to end up happening is that this pipe is slowly going to cool down, and it's going to slowly warm up the hydrogen until the two match. This eventually will lead to a state change. So if you're looping in space in a vacuum, be advised you might want to pre-chill your pipes. Alternatively, you can also use radiant pipes in these types of scenarios, and then that state change is pretty much done, and then you can just go about your business and go do other things instead of worrying about this pipe to break. Now there is one way that you can prevent state changing in a pipe, and that has to do with a little game optimization that the game has regarding state changes and like the size of a packet of material in a pipe. Anything that is below 1,000 grams, 1,000 grams or less, will not actually be influenced by state changes. So if you really wanted to, you could use a liquid valve and set the flow control to 1,000 grams, for example. And then we need a duplicate to make this change for us. Thank you so much, Nisbet, for your sacrifice and your contribution. But now we're only allowing 1,000 gram packets through this pipe, and you'll notice that sure, this pipe started at 20 degrees and it's cooled down, but no state change happened in this pipe, and that's great. So if you don't mind how much fluid is flowing through your pipe, you can use a liquid valve to prevent a pipe from breaking, and this might come in really handy if you're working in, say, like lava or, I don't know, various situations that would require you to maybe not have access to repair a broken pipe that has broken due to a state change. Thank you, Nisbet. We love you. Well, that about wraps up today's tutorial on pipes. Thanks so much for being here. We may do an advanced tutorial in the future on designs and patterns for tackling different problems. We'll have to see how it goes. If you need help solving piping problems, feel free to join our Discord where you can find like-minded individuals who are building large bases and, more importantly, helping each other learn and grow. The link is in the description down below. Additionally, if you found this video helpful and you'd like me to more content and tutorials on Auction Not Included, please drop me a like, comment, and subscribe. It'll help me know that this content is needed and what you are looking for in the future for additional tutorial content. Lastly, as a reminder, if you ever want to watch or chat during a live stream, we stream a few days a week over on Twitch, and I often do live tutorials on stream for people needing help. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.